Hello everyone and welcome to the next session of AVR120. We are going to go over Unity today, go over the interface a little bit, and then we'll go over setting up a top-down 2D game and then some additional 2D movement to go along with that. So to begin, what you're going to want to go ahead and do is, if you haven't already done so, download Unity from this site here. So it's unity3d.com/get-unity/download. And from here, you're going to want to go ahead and download Unity Hub. Now, we'll be going ahead and using the latest LTS version. So I have Unity Hub pulled up here. I need to update it, but if you go to installs, all right, and you go to add, the version we're going to be using is this latest 2021.3.9F, and that's the latest LTS version there. Okay? So go ahead and make sure you've got that downloaded. And once you've gone ahead and downloaded that, we'll go ahead and begin. So once the project opens up for you, it should look a lot like this here. And so we're going to go over just the general layout of Unity here, and then we can go ahead and start putting things together. So on the left here, you will see the hierarchy. The hierarchy is where all of your game objects will go. Everything that you create in Unity will be a game object. So if I right click in the hierarchy, I can actually create all sorts of different game objects here. For 2D, I could create like a circle, and you'll see that it pops up on the screen. So I basically I right clicked, went to 2D objects, sprites, and a circle. And in the main kind of viewport here, in the scene tab, you'll see the actual object there. Okay. Now, when you click on an object, all right, a game object, if you look to the right, you'll see the inspector, and the inspector shows information about that game object. So a game object, all right, is made up of components. And there are a variety of different components that Unity has that provide a variety of different functionality. So you can see on here it has what's something called a transform. So a transform component is it's essentially this object's location in 3D space. Now you'll see that it's at the 000 section of the scene in the scene view, and that just means that it's at the kind of center of the in-game world space there. And so you have your position, okay? So you have your position here, and that's the X, Y, and Z coordinates in 3D space or location of the game object, okay? The rotation is the way the object is oriented on the X, Y, and Z axes. So, I could rotate the object, 90 degrees, right, on the X, and you'll see that it makes it flat because it is we're working in 2D space, right? So basically, it's making it like a line. So we don't want to do that. So we're going to set that back to 0. And then this is the scale. And you can scale things up and down on their axes as well. So if I kind of move this here, you can see I can make objects bigger, smaller on the X axis, which is the horizontal axis, right? I can invert it, don't want to do that. I can make it bigger on the Y, okay, via those components there. And so that's the transform component, right? I'm just gonna click this and press Control Z. We have the sprite renderer component. Okay, so that's actually showing the sprite, and you have all these different fields in these components. Okay, so like the sprite will actually show the image. The color is obviously white. We could click this and make it red. And if you kind of lose the inspector, see how I lost it there? If you click in the hierarchy, that selects the object there. And the way these games objects work too with these components is you can add components, and so you can add different things here. And we'll be kind of doing that as we go along, and I'll explain kind of some of the components that we can add. In addition to that, I'll go over the project panel as well. So the project panel is on the bottom here. Okay, so you'll see this is, remember, this is the hierarchy. This is where all the items go. This is the inspector with that basically inspects the item that you're kind of selected. You have selected. And on the bottom here, you have the project panel, and the project panel essentially is where all of your like in-game assets will go. So any 3D models, sprites, anything like that. And you'll see here that we don't really have much in here, but we do have like a sample scene. Okay. Um, and so a scene, okay, is a particular type of game object that is essentially a level in Unity. So we have kind of our right now we're in our sample scene or our sample level, but we're going to create another scene and put our project in that. So we can go ahead and right click down here, all right. And the create options here you'll see are different from the hierarchy. So in the hierarchy, if I right click, I can create like actual 3D, 2D objects, put effects in there, and that's all related to things that are actually going to be going in the scene. Versus the project panel is all related to basically files. So, I could have the script here. This is, or I guess I should say file or assets. So we can create, folders, scripts. You can create these different things like sprites and tile palettes from the project panel as well. But predominantly most of the files kind of go there as well. So we'll go ahead and we'll right click. We'll go to create and we'll create a new scene. All right, and we'll just call this, we can call this kind of, we'll call it a field. Okay, and so now we've created our scene, we can click into this here. I mean, we can save it, it's not a big deal. We just added a sprite. So we'll make another scene in just a second here, but I did want to show you really quickly some of the selection options as well, and explain this panel a little bit more. So you'll see that there's like two tabs here, right? So if we click into the game tab, you'll see that the circle is there. And this is the actual game view of the application that we're going to be working on, okay? So the scene view is what you use to essentially kind of add and edit your scene. All right. And again, a scene's a level, so it allows you to edit your scene. And you have a variety of different options to move objects and manipulate objects in the scene. So if I click the sprite here, all right, right now we're on the rect transform. All right, it'll kind of default to that for sprites. When you click this, so the rect transform allows us to manipulate the shape of the circle more or less via these little kind of handles here. So you can make it bigger, scale it up. You can scale it on the Y and the X axis. And then if you grab it from the middle, you can reposition it as well. Okay. So I'm just going to go ahead and Control Z all that because I don't really want it to be that shape. So you can also, if we press the quick key for that is T. So with the object selected again, if you lose it, you want to go over to the hierarchy and select it from there, all right? And so you can see we already have a main camera, right? So the camera is essentially a game object that will render the object, and you can see if you click on the camera, it'll actually give us our camera view, so like what we're seeing in the game right here without having to go to the game tab. And this is essentially what the camera is seeing. So if we go back to the circle here, if we press the W key, for example, all right, that allows us to actually move the object. Now, because we're in 2D, we can only move it into the X and the Y. So you can see the Y axis here and the X axis here, and that directly translates to the transform, right? So the center of these rays here essentially are the middle center point of the object and the object's kind of position in the 3D space. So if I grab this little red X handle here, I can move it along the X axis. And then if I grab the Y handle, I can move it along the Y. And then if I grab this little kind of box here, I can kind of move it freely. Okay? So that is the W key, that is the move tool, right? So if we go through, all the tools are also lifted and docked on the left here, right? So the rotate tool, okay? We can go ahead and rotate the object as well, like I said, kind of discussed before. The quick key for that is E, all right? So W is the move, E is the rotate, okay? And you can kind of rotate the object. This is a circle, so rotation isn't going to really show anything, but let's say I go ahead and I create another 2D object. I create a square, right? Maybe make this like blue. And if I select it here, okay, I named it W by accident, but we'll just call it square again. And I did that. Another quick thing to know is if you like select an object and you press F2, you can quickly rename it. Also works for like just files in general. So I'm going to move it so it's out of the kind of camera gizmo there. And you can see if I press E now and I'm on the rotation, I can rotate the object, and you can see how that kind of works there. It's rotating it. So just going to Control Z again. Again, T, we already went over that, is the rect tool. Allows us to enlarge and make objects smaller. And then the scale tool is R. So this will make the object bigger and smaller. So if I like drag from the middle, it scales up the entire object proportionally. But if I do, let's say, grab the Y handle here, that's going to scale it up on the Y. I'm just going to press Control Z. And then the X handle here will scale it up on the X axis there. Okay, so we have all those there. And then the transform tool, honestly, I don't use this too much, but this allows you to basically kind of do everything in one. So you can move it, you can rotate it, you can scale it up and down from the middle. Just quickly allows you to do all the things at once. You can move it freely by clicking the box. So it has all those options there. Now, in terms of moving around the scene so that you can go to different areas, so you can scroll in and out with the middle mouse button. If you select an object, you scroll in and out, and it will scroll in and out on that kind of object there. If you hold the middle mouse button, this allows you to actually move the viewport around the world, okay? And that's pretty much it for like 2D. So if we wanted to take this off of 2D mode, which we don't because we're working in a 2D game, but just for showing this here, on the top right hand side of this scene view, if you click the 2D, this will put us in 3D mode, okay? And so you can kind of see how this works. These are sprites, right? So, they're 2D. Obviously, it's on a 2D plane. But in the 3D version, right, of the scene view, you can see that it's 2D. So in this version here, in order to move, you can do the same thing I told you. So you can hold down the middle mouse button. You can zoom in and out that way as well. But also to rotate around the orientation of the object, you hold Alt, okay, and then left click, and that will rotate around the orientation of the object that you have selected there, okay? It also, if you scroll it, hold Alt and scroll in and out, it will kind of do the same thing where, but it will kind of have it a little bit off to the side there. I guess it will zoom it out, not based on the object. Essentially, it'll just zoom it out normally without using the objects as the center point of the zoom. See, so if I have the object selected and I just do normal forward and back on the mouse wheel, it'll zoom in and out. But if I hold Alt, it kind of zooms in and out depending on where you've located it versus um, uh, if the object's in view, essentially of the viewport, and I just move the mouse up and down, it'll kind of just focus in and out of it, depending on what I'm have selected there. Okay, so that's kind of it for the basic rundown of the how to use Unity. So we're going to go ahead and create a new scene and a new level essentially. So I'll go ahead and I will go to the scenes folder here. I'll go to create and I will create a new scene right here. And I'll call this Lake Adventure Field. Double click into that. It's going to prompt me to save this. We're not really going to use it, but you can save it if you'd like. Okay. And now I want to go ahead and turn 2D mode back on. So I'm going to go ahead and do that now. Okay. And this outline as well shows you everything that's in the camera's view in the top-down 2D environment. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and get started here by downloading a package from the asset store to have some assets for us to use in the project here. And then one more thing I wanted to mention too is there's two main workflows for 2D. There is tile-based and sprite-based, okay? So tile-based, you'll have a tile palette and you'll be able to basically kind of paint tiles onto a grid. So just like this grid here, you'll be able to paint tiles and create ground and environment using that, and that's the predominant workflow we're going to be working in. The other workflow is sprite based, so that would be more like a side scrolling viewpoint. And I mean, you could do top down with sprites as well, but it's predominantly side scrolling. And sprites are basically just kind of images, and they differ from tile maps in that tile maps kind of you can paint using the tile map, but a sprite is actually essentially like I guess tile map is a game object too, but a sprite is more object based and it gives you a little bit more control and detail and allows for some dynamic environments. But everything essentially is going to have a lot of detail because it's a sprite, so it's just not going to be as quick. And sprites need to be sliced, so you need the sprite editor to slice it, and you need to basically cut around them to be able to use them. And so what we're going to download is a tile map, well, it's going to be an asset pack. It's going to have a tile map, and then it's going to have like a character sprite in it. But basically, we can use that tile map to paint onto the grid and then create an environment for our player to walk around in, and that's kind of what we'll be doing for the rest of this session here. So we're going to go ahead and download the assets here. So I'm just going to open up the link from my browser, but that's the link you're going to want to go ahead and use. Probably the easiest way to do this would be to just Google Unity Asset Store. And then from here, you can just type in Tiny RPG Forest. That's the pack. And you'll see it's this one here. I've already kind of downloaded it, right? But basically, you'll need to download it from the store here. And then it's giving me the option to open in Unity, but it's going to say add to your assets or add to assets for you. And I should say also, actually, once you've downloaded Unity, you're going to need to make a Unity ID. And so you won't be able to download this without a Unity ID. I suggest when you make a Unity ID that you're going to need to like enter your email and some information. Enter the email that I would enter a personal email as opposed to like a school email, simply because if you lose your school email account, you wouldn't be able to access your Unity ID. So you're probably better off using your personal email. But once you have all that set up here, you'll be able to just click this and add it to your assets there. And we'll be able to download the package in Unity. So once you've done that and you've downloaded your assets, you can go ahead and click the Open in Unity. And open in Unity, it should give you the option to open in Unity Editor. All right. And we'll go ahead and it will take us to the package manager. So if you're not getting that option, what you can go ahead and do is go to Window, okay, and Package Manager, okay. And here is essentially all of the packages that you have downloaded from the assets, or you can see I have a lot here. And you can switch back and forth between like your sets of assets and my assets. There's also just built-in packages that Unity comes with. So the Unity registry, we're going to use a package at a later session. And then in project is what you currently have downloaded in your actual project that you're working on here. So again, this should be in my assets, and if you scroll down, you'll see you need to find the Tiny RPG Forest, okay? So go ahead and click that, all right, and you'll want to click Import. Sorry, you'll need to click Download. So I already downloaded this, so I don't need to download it again. So once you've downloaded it and finished downloading it, you'll want to click Import. And it'll give you the options to import all of your assets here. You're going to want to select all of them and then click import. It'll go ahead and add all of the assets to the scene. We'll exit out of here. And now you can see that we have a folder that says Tiny RPG Forest, and it has all this artwork in it, environments, and all the good stuff that we can go ahead and use for our project here. Okay. So one other thing I want to mention too that I didn't mention before is that you can actually move all of these panels to a configuration that's maybe different from the default that you like. So if you actually grab the little tabs here, you can move them. And when they kind of do this kind of motion here. So like, let's say I have it, you can see I have it here, but when I kind of get the mouse close to the edge here, it like docks it to that side of the window. And then if I let it go, now my project pane is up there. So I don't really want that. So I'm just going to I'm going to grab the tab and then just move it back down to where it was. I like the default. It's fine, just fine with me. And you can kind of move the order of your tabs here like this. Another thing to mention here is the console. So if you click on this, this actually gives you like your errors or any issues that you may have. So it's saying we have some issues with the assets. That's not a big deal. Sometimes there are some issues with the there is settings that may be a little bit different than what you have in your project. Generally, that's not, if it's not causing a red error and just not preventing you from running it, then you should be okay. So now we'll go ahead and start getting things set up here. So now what we'll go ahead and do is check some of the settings here. So you want to go to your assets and then Tiny RPG Forests, that folder. So if you go from assets into Tiny Assets, Tiny RPG Forest, the artwork, environment, and what we're looking at, this tile set sliced here. This should say 100 pixels per unit. Switch this to 20. So just to show you, you just go to this field. All right, switch that to 20. The sprite mode needs to be multiple to make sure it's that. The filter mode needs to be point, no filter. That just means essentially that the graphics will be pixelated. This is the pixels per section of the grid. And sprite mode multiple means that there are multiple essentially sprites within this tile set sliced. The compression will be set to none. And we'll go ahead and apply that. I already applied these settings, so I can't do it, but you should be able to apply. And then what we're going to want to go ahead and do is create a tile map. So we'll go ahead, we'll right click on in the hierarchy, we'll scroll down to tile map, and we'll select rectangular. So right click, 2D objects, tile map, rectangular. There you go. And now you'll see that we kind of have a grid and this tile map here. And so we can basically use this to create some ground. And a tile map is like a layer. So in Unity, if we want multiple tiles on top of each other, so let's say you have like the ground tiles and then you want some trees on top of that, we need to create multiple tile maps, and they will be ordered in essentially by this order in layer option here. So if you click on the tile map itself, the component is the tile map render and this order in layer section here. If this is set to 0, okay, that means it's the first thing that will basically be drawn on the screen. And anything either, like if something was set to -1, for example, that was put in the scene, it will be covered by this object here. So we'll go ahead and start setting this up here. And the tile map is the kind of configuration for each layer. The tile map, so this is how you configure each layer, would be here. This looks correct. The tile map renderer is like what tile map you want to use. So right now we don't have anything set there. And so we're going to go ahead and open up the window option and go to the tile palette. So you're going to scroll down to 2D and we'll open this tile palette up. And now we have this kind of little tile palette window here. And if you need to reset your windows for any reason, let's say you accidentally close out a window or dock it weird, a window weird, and you don't know how to fix it, if you go to Window and then Layouts, you can set it to default, which will set it to the original layout that the project opened in, or you can click Reset All Layouts and it'll put all of the windows back to the original way that they were. So we'll go ahead and kind of, we can dock this now. So we'll go ahead and dock this to the right of the screen here, like so, because I want to be able to see it easily and access it. Okay, and then we'll create a new palette here. So we have the option to create a new palette by clicking this down arrow, and we'll name it ground tiles and click create. And we want to be organized with this, so let's go from this section here where this is asking us to like basically where we want to save this tile palette to. So we'll click assets here, and we will actually, this is the top level folder for all of the assets in the scene. It's the same folder as the assets here in project panel. We'll go ahead and create a new folder, call this tile map palettes. We'll click into that, and we can go ahead and drag the, oh, excuse me, sorry, we'll just go ahead and select this folder. Okay. And so now we have our tile palette here with all of the, nothing in it at the moment, but what we can go ahead and do is now drag this slice tiles into here. And again, it'll ask us to basically now save these tiles here. So we will go to the assets folder again, and instead we will put this in a new folder. We'll create a new folder. So again, just to reiterate, the way I did that was I went to the top here in the file path and I clicked assets. I go ahead and create a new file, call this tiles. Okay, click into tiles. We'll make another folder called ground tiles, because we want to kind of stay organized here, like so. Click into that, and we will select that folder. And now we are saving our slice tiles to that folder location here. We'll kind of let it give it a little time to import. Okay, so now we have all of our tiles here on the right. And so the way this tile palette works here is you have these selector options up here. This one actually selects areas on the grid. So if you press S while you are while you're clicked into the tile palette, you'll have the select option. And you can actually like drag sections. You can drag your mouse and left click and drag, and you can take these sections and then you can actually paint them. So you can drag your mouse across different sections while you have the select an area of the grid option, this first option selected here, and you can actually highlight sections that you want to grab. And then if you click the brush now and we bring it out to the grid, you'll see that it actually will paint it to this grid. Now, the tiles that we've imported are a little too small. So in order to kind of adjust it, I'm going to go ahead and go to the grid, and I'm actually going to make each cell size 0.75 on the X and 0.75 on the Y, like so. And now you'll see if I like mouse back over it, um, the tiles fit. So, I can go ahead and make a simple ground. So I have this 4 selected here. You can just do like one at a time, or if you drag and left click, you can select multiple. So I'll select 4 at a time, and I'll kind of do something like this, where I hold left click, and now I can kind of paint with it. And maybe I'll just make some kind of edges here. Like so. And we can kind of, and I made a kind of mistake, or maybe I don't want that, or I can kind of roll with it, but um, I can select an option here like this, maybe paint part of the ground over here. I'll grab this edge and I'll kind of make some more edges here. Kind of a happy little tile map there. So we'll just go ahead and do something like this. And you guys can make this, any way that you want there. So if you hold left click and down, it like copies everything, but I think I'm just gonna kind of do it this way here, where I just mouse over a box and then I just left click. And I'll just kind of fill this in. And there we go. So now we kind of have like a simple ground. So if we go to the game view here, you'll see that the camera is kind of zoomed in, but it fills up the whole screen, right? So now we're going to go ahead and set up the character in the scene. So we can use the same assets that we have been using. So we'll go to the Tiny RPG Forest again, artwork, and then this time we're going to go to the sprites folder. If we click into the sprites folder, you can see on the right hand side here, we have 4 folders in there. And so we'll go to the hero folder. We will double click into that. And I want to go to the idle folder, okay? And then we're going to do hero idle front. So we'll double click that. And now you see that we have this sprite in there. We can go ahead and drag it into the hierarchy here, like so. And now we have the object in the scene. We're not going to see it because it's on the same layer as the tiles, and the tiles will cover it. So we're going to set this to 1 now. And so we do have it in here. It's just very, very small, as you can see. So we're going to want to set everything to the same exact amount of pixels. So I'm going to go ahead and we can select all of the textures in the scene and the different components as well by going to this kind of search by type option button here. We can click that. And if we scroll down to texture, this is everything that we have in this pack. So I'll go ahead and I'm going to left click the first object and I'm going to scroll down and then I'm just going to shift left click the last object here. And we can actually edit all these objects like at the same time. So what I'm going to do is set this all to 20, the pixels per unit. So again, I selected everything and then the pixels per unit, I set that to 20. I'm going to go ahead and click apply. It's going to take a second. And then now if we double click the hero here, we see if I move it, you can see him. He's a lot bigger, right? But he's still covered by the tile map there. So that's because I made a mistake here, and the tile map actually needs to be the 0 order in layer because we want it to be the ground. So it's the first layer essentially that we want. So the layers start in order from 0 onward. So I'm going to set this to 0. And now we can see the hero. And we're going to set him to his order in layer to 1. And if we go to the game view now, we kind of see that he's kind of just standing there. So now what we'll go ahead and do is we will set it up so that the player can now move. So in order for, I'm going to go ahead and rename this as well. So we'll rename the hero idle front to just hero, like so. And if we select hero and we click add component, okay, we can add additional components to this game object. And so what we're going to go ahead and add now is a component called rigid body 2D. Now rigid body 2D, all right, allows for essentially the physics that Unity has a built-in physics engine that the developers have created. So it allows for those physics to be applied to the game object. And so what we're going to go ahead and do here, okay, is basically add some physics to this character to help make him move. So we're going to add this rigid body component to the game object. So make sure you have the hero selected in the hierarchy and then click add component and add the rigid body. And we want to set the gravity scale, okay, to 0. Because we don't want to, if it's not set to 0, he's going to just fall through the floor because it's a 2D game, so gravity doesn't really apply here from the top-down view. We're also going to freeze, we're going to open up this constraints option and freeze his rotation on the Z so he can't, because the Z is essentially the vector that's coming towards the screen. So we have the X vector and the Y vector here, and then there's another vector if it was in 3D that would be coming towards essentially the camera. So we're going to freeze his rotation on that because we don't want him to be rotating weirdly around that vector that's facing the screen. And then we're going to create our first script here. So a script is essentially just a code file. So similar to what we've been kind of doing with the code, we're going to add the script here to this hero game object, and that will add that adds custom functionality based off of the code or script that we're writing. So we'll go ahead and click add component, and you'll see that one of the options is new script. So we'll click new script, and we'll go ahead and call this player movement. No spaces, capital P, capital M. And then we'll go ahead and select create and add. Okay. So now we have the script on the player. It has nothing in it, but we have it on the player there. And then we also, if we go back up to assets in the project panel, we'll see that we have this file here, this .cs file. This is actually the script file. So I want to put this in a folder just to be organized. So I'm going to go ahead and from assets, I'm going to right click and create a folder. So right click, create folder. And I'm going to call this scripts. And I'm just going to drag it in there. All right, so then let's go back to hero now. And from here, we'll double click the player movement script. And now that opens up. And you can see the script here. If it doesn't automatically open up Visual Studio for you, what you're going to need to do, okay, let me minimize this. You need to go up to Edit. All right, you need to scroll down to Preferences. And then from there, you're going to click External Tools. And this is how you associate a code editor with the script. So in this case, we want Microsoft Visual Studio, and it came installed with 2019, but it's okay if you want to use 2022 as well. I'm just going to use 2019 for now, but you can use using 2022 shouldn't cause any issues. All right, so I'll minimize this and open the code back up here. And we'll go ahead and just delete this start here. Well, let me back up. So this is what the script looks like. It's exactly the same as what we were kind of working on with our console RPG. The player movement is a class, and it inherits from mono behavior. And so mono behavior is the underlying kind of class that controls all of the functionality within Unity, and everything inherits from it. So whenever you make a script, it'll already be set up like this. And that is just like a necessity there. This start function gets called before the first frame of the update function. Okay, so when the program starts, this gets called shortly after the program starts, and it gets called before update, and update is a function that will run every single frame. So whatever you have in here will run every frame that the game is running. So we don't need the start function, so I'm going to go ahead and just delete that. And I'm going to create a public float. I'm going to zoom in a little bit. Public float move speed variable, and I'm going to set it to 5. Okay. And I'm going to comment this as I go. I'll just comment this and say variable to control move speed of player. And then we're going to need a reference to the rigid body, okay? That's on the character game object back in Unity. So we'll say public rigid body 2D and lowercase r and b to represent rigid body. And this is, we'll write a comment that says reference to our player's rigid body. We'll go ahead and create a vector 2. So a vector, if you remember that the transform has an x, y, and z, so those are all vectors. And objects in space are located via 3 intersecting vectors. So a vector 2 is the x vector, and the y vector is an x vector and a y vector. And so a vector 2, you'll see representation of 2D vectors and points, okay? We'll create a vector 2 called movement, and we will say that this will store our movement. Going to use this to pass movement input to fixed update, which I'll explain in a second here, to actually move the character. So now in update, we're going to go ahead and get the user's input here. So we can do this by accessing the input class using dot notation and accessing a method called getAccessRaw. And we are going to get the, this takes a string, okay, and the axis name. And so we're going to take the horizontal axis. And so the horizontal axis, all right, is whatever the user enters input on the keyboard that we've designated in the editor. This will get the left and right inputs, and it will give us a value between 1 and -1. So this is getting the user's left and right key inputs, and we've bound this to A and D in the editor. So D, the right input, will give us +1, and A will give us -1. And so likewise, we're going to do this on the other axis here. So we'll access the input class. We'll get an axis, and we'll get the vertical axis. And again, same thing. This will give us a value between -1 and 1 when going up and down. And so now we are getting the user's input here. And so what we want to do is take that input and use it to move the player. In order to do that, we need to basically set these to variables, okay? And then we need to use a method that is on the rigid body, which we've referenced here, okay? The player's rigid body. There's a method on a built-in Unity method on that rigid body that has a function that will essentially allow us to use these inputs to move the player in a direction. And we'll use this movement vector to store those inputs. So we'll set that up now, and we will go ahead and take the movement dot x value, so the x vector, and we will set that equal to the horizontal input. Likewise, we will take the movement dot y vector, and we will set that equal to the vertical input here. And so if we save this here, these axes and these inputs we've set in the editor. So if we go back to our game here and we go to edit and down to preferences, we can go ahead and, oops, sorry, not preferences, go to edit and project settings. All right. If we select in this list the input manager, all right, you'll see here on the right hand side, if we open up these axes, you have all these options here, okay, to select. And so the horizontal axes, all right, is what we're accessing. And that's set to the A and D keys, all right? So the negative button, that's negative, the -1, right, is A, so that is the left. And then D is the right, or the left and right buttons here, okay? And then the vertical axes here, okay, is the S button to go forward, or the W button to go forward. That's the positive one, and the negative one is the S. Okay, so that's what we're accessing via that code. You don't have to completely understand the code, but just know that's kind of what we're doing. We're getting the user's input, we're setting it to this movement vector 2. We're storing it in the movement X and the movement Y. And then we're going to go ahead and now we're going to move the player based on these inputs. So in order to do that, we're going to use another version of update called fixed update. So we'll go private, void, fixed update here. And it kind of auto completes it for us. And we will say, kind of explain this. So when using physics, we use fixed update. And this is because fixed update is independent of frame rate. So physics based motions won't go very quickly. Okay, so now we'll go ahead and use the move position function that I had mentioned that comes from the rigid body we're referencing from the player. So we'll go ahead and click RB dot move position. All right, and move position takes a vector2 position, which we have. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to take the current position of the player and we're going to add the vector2 movement and then multiply that by our move speed variable so that we can give it, and I spelled this wrong, so it should be position. Yeah, that's why I'm getting an error. So we'll add the movement and then we'll multiply it by the move speed. And then we need to multiply it by another function in Unity called time dot fixed delta time. And then we'll need to put a semicolon there. And so this is our movement, and we'll go ahead and say, kind of explain this again. So it's the original position of the player plus the inputs we just got, okay, movement input variables, all right, and then multiplied by our move speed variable. And we'll also say to keep move speed constant regardless of the regardless of how many times fixed update gets called, we need to multiply the amount by fixed by time dot fixed delta time, and time dot fixed delta time equals the amount of time that has elapsed since the time since the time the last function was called. So it's a little complicated, but basically that's what's happening. We're getting the original position of the player object. We're adding in the movement inputs. We're multiplying that by our move speed variable, and then we're multiplying that whole thing by fixed time dot delta time, which is the last time this fixed update was called, so that we can keep the speed nice and constant regardless of if this gets called a whole bunch of times. So we'll go ahead and save that now. And if we go back to the editor, all right, we need to set up our reference. So you'll see over here in Inspector, once I click Hero, we have the move speed script, and you'll see that the move speed variable pops up in the script, like so. And that's because we made it public, and public will allow us to access it from the editor. And then the rigid body was also public, if you remember. So if we go back into the code, this rigid body was also public. So this will allow us to access this from the vendor as well, from the engine as well. And we see that it's asking for a rigid body 2D. So luckily we have this already up here on our hero game object, which is this here. So we'll drag this rigid body into the rigid body slot here like so. Okay. And that's what we'll use to do our calculations. We're going to go ahead and save this, and we'll click play. And now I can move the player around the scene. But they're not animated yet. So that's what we're going to go ahead and focus on in the next session. We'll be animating the player. Just kind of a warning, that one is it's a little complicated, so just be sure to follow along very closely. But other than that, that should be it for this session. Thanks so much, guys, and we'll see you on the next one.